So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 151, which is really a great group chat that we just had with Becky Center, who's currently the CEO of Indiegogo. So, Indiegogo is a leading crowdfunding platform that's helped over 900,000 projects come to life by connecting them with the community of over 9 million backers. So, prior to joining Indiegogo as a CEO, Becky was at HealthJoy and before that at Groupon. So, she has some really incredible marketplace experience. So this is a really great chat with Becky, where we got to learn more about her previous experience at Groupon and HealthJoy, what some of her key learnings were, what led her to joining Indiegogo as a CEO, did a deep dive into it as a leading crowdfunding platform, discussed topics like balancing supply and demand, and also had a great group Q&A. So really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Becky, welcome to the group chat, and you have some really awesome marketplace experience previously at Groupon, HealthJoy, and of course now as the CEO of Indiegogo. So I'm excited to have you join us here today, and would like to start off by saying a huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So before we get into all of your experience and also dive into Indiegogo as a crowdfunding platform, I think it might be great if you can start off by briefly sharing your background for those that might not know you.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. It's really cool to be here. It's so fun to talk to other founders and leaders in their various fields. So thanks for having me. Just a little bit about myself. I'm currently the CEO of Indiegogo. Indiegogo is a crowdfunding company, and we'll probably get into all sorts of details as we go. My background is a little bit all over the place. I started out very technical in data warehouse, business intelligence. I was a product manager for a while. I became chief of staff, and then I was the general manager running a business unit within Groupon. I then spent time running both product and a few business units within a smaller health tech company, HealthJoy, before finding my home here at Indiegogo. So I've been a bit wandering. I've done a little bit of everything. And I think that all of those different experiences sort of stacked up to, set me up to be running this company. So great to be here.
Yeah, no, that's such an incredible background. Thanks for sharing with us. So definitely a lot we're going to get into here with Indiegogo. But I guess if we go back to, Groupon though, could you maybe share a little bit more about, your experience at Groupon and what you were working on at the time?
Yeah. So I was at Groupon for almost a decade. I joined right around when we IPO'd. So that was a company, if you can go back and remember, it was massive, massive growth, huge, global. We were probably had operations in 40 countries. We were so big. And I started out in data and the data team, which was really, really technical, really interesting, we had acquired a bunch of companies. So you're integrating platforms and you're looking at the strategy of the business through the data. So everything's very data driven. I could go into more detail, but I started off on be here forever, started off on the data team. I worked for quite a bit in local, which if you think about Groupon and the different verticals, there would be local, which had its own sub-verticals you might think of as restaurants and manicures and things like that. And then there was travel, there were physical goods. So there were kind of all these different verticals. So we spent a while on local, spent time like I mentioned, as chief of staff for the CEO, which was super cool. Public company, getting to be in the board meetings and think about investor relations and just things that I never would have done from product management. And then I went on to run my own unit, which was an affiliate marketing business unit, kind of something else within Groupon. So I was all over the place. I got to do a little bit of product, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of sales. I got to experience a lot within the company.
So I guess, what were some of those maybe challenges, at the time, with it as a business? And then maybe if we kind of look back, some of the key learnings that you've taken with you now to Indiegogo.
Challenges were, like I said, we had this explosive growth and we were still a small, it's not small, almost an early stage startup company with large, public company growth. So figuring everything out as we were going was just really, really interesting. I think the learnings from that are just how to be scrappy and how to be, I don't want to say aggressive in a bad way, aggressive in a good way, like just figuring it out and going and not waiting, not being bogged down, being really creative, taking ownership, seeing opportunity and running with it. So there was tons of opportunity and tons of green space there. It's kind of a category creator, and that meant that no one else was doing it. There was no one necessarily to model after. You had to get really creative. And I feel like those, as someone who was a math major, I would have maybe said, oh, I'm more analytical. I'm not creative. I learned how to be creative and what does that mean and how do you, balance those two. And that's been the most fun space for me as well in my career, and definitely the most challenging and interesting.
Sounds like some great learnings and kind of takeaways. So if we kind of transition, into Indiegogo, what led you to joining Indiegogo as the CEO more recently?
I just fell in love with this company, the mission. So Indiegogo's mission is to empower people to unite around the ideas that matter to them and together bring those ideas to life. A really, really beautiful mission-driven company. We talked about Groupon a little bit, but it's funny enough because I never thought about it this way when I was there, but in a lot of ways, Groupon was also, in a sense, originally crowdfunding, and the model is very similar. If enough people can get behind a campaign, can get behind, a small business. The original Groupon model was there was kind of a tipping point. If enough people would support it, then the discount would go to everyone. Later, we changed that, but it's very, very similar. That's what's happening with crowdfunding. And I've always loved when technology and platform and scale can be used to help people, businesses, needs that otherwise can't, scale. And some, like when you think about small local businesses, when you think about individual entrepreneurs, innovators, they don't have access to the same technology, to the same platform that the large companies do, but Indiegogo is providing that platform to them and giving them a way to leverage technology to do something really, really hard, to launch something new and creative and innovative. So the mission really, the mission resonated with me. The needs of the business kind of helped to, leverage some of the skills I had gained throughout my career, and it was a little bit of a stars aligning situation, and culture fit, people fit, everything like that. It's been almost 2 years now, and it's just been so fun every day.
So, Indiegogo is, of course, it's a name that we all probably have heard of, and some of us have maybe even used. But I guess it's also worth noting that it's is it about 15 years old as far as a company, or?
Yeah, that's right. 15 years. Let me do my math there. I think we started about 2008, so maybe even a little older now. But yeah, it's been around for a while, and we've had different evolutions. So originally we started in film, and the idea was, hey, there's all these independent filmmakers and storytellers, and it's very hard for them to get capital to, they write their script, but to actually put it on, it's very hard for them to access capital and maybe traditional means. There's gatekeeping and, who's able to get in the door. But when I say it's mission driven, the mission of the company and the kind of thought behind it was, well, anyone should be able to tell their story if enough other people believe in it. So let's open that up to the crowd. And if you can get enough people to support you financially, then you can tell your story. And so we started in film, and as with many, I'm sure, of the companies on this call, you then start expanding to other categories, and then you have authors who are writing books. And then it really expanded when we got into physical and hardware products. So now you have someone who's passionate about coffee, like we all love our coffee, and people are making the best in the grinders or the roasters, or you have these like niche enthusiasts in all different verticals. Photography is another one. Anything that people really care about and are passionate about and have an idea they want to make happen, they can go to crowdfunding, find their backers or their audience, their supporters, and help financially support their campaign.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually mentioned the categories, because that was something I was going to ask about, as far as how many categories that you're in. I guess for for a little bit of for context as well, it might be helpful. Could you kind of walk us through when you mentioned crowdfunding and some of the kind of campaigns, what that kind of process is like for I would say like a creator, kind of entrepreneur, having a campaign and going live on Indiegogo.
So funny enough, I think there's a lot of work that goes into preparing for a crowdfunding campaign, and not necessarily because the setup is hard, because you could set up your campaign in a day just like you would make your LinkedIn profile or your Airbnb page. But like anything, you have to put a lot of work into it. So we see creators come in and they say, this is my idea that I have. I use the coffee grinder example. So let's go with that. I have an idea for a coffee grinder. I've put in research now. Ideally I've gotten to prototype and I know what I want to do. But before I go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in sourcing the material and getting manufacturing space and moving forward with actually producing, I need to raise the funds to do that, and B, and what's really powerful about our platform is I want to validate that I have the right audience, that I have those people who are gonna believe in this and back it. So you do your crowdfunding campaign and you say, if I'm gonna set a perk or a reward, maybe it's $200, and if enough people will give me $200 and I raise my goal, then I can go out, produce my batch, and in the end, as a thank you, I will send you the coffee grinder. So that's sort of the structure. Is the funds get given by the backers. I always want to designate we are perks-based or rewards-based crowdfunding. There's also equity crowdfunding where you're an owner in the company. We don't do equity crowdfunding. So it's really about a perk or reward. And you set up your campaign, and then there's a lot that goes into that: marketing, finding the right audience, making sure you've priced it right, that you have designed it right. Then and then we could get into all the details, but if you have a successful campaign, you go off, you make your product, and then the end you send your product out. And then what's really cool, just to add on to that, is that's not the end of the journey, of course, for a creator. If they do all of that and everyone loves it, they're gonna, go on to scale. So a lot of times crowdfunding is sort of that very early proof point to then go raise more capital, potentially through traditional means or other means, and say, hey, this is the audience I have. This is my actual revenue now at this point. I have proof that people want it, that it's working, and I'm going to go on and make my business and scale from there.
Yeah, no, that's a really great example. So, sometimes as marketplaces, we really think about, the work that's needed in order for like supply to kind of come onto our marketplace and ultimately be successful. So, how do you think about that and the role Indiegogo plays with creators and kind of campaigns?
We play a heavier role in that than I imagine most other marketplaces do, or maybe just my experience. So we actually do have a campaign strategy team, and we work pretty heavily with the creators. Maybe not with, again, you can self-serve, you can come on, you don't need to, but we want to help make sure they're successful. And it is this really interesting thing where you have to find the right fit between what you're trying to do. There's such a variety of supply, if you will, and it's not, it's different, I think, than stocking the shelves. It's not like one is a commodity for another. They're all very unique, and there's sort of a unique strategy. So we do work pretty extensively with those creators and offer help. And there's also marketing agencies, third-party agencies that have sort of popped up in this industry around us that, also can work and help creators. So we want to make sure everyone's as successful as possible.
Yeah. And then as far as like on the demand side, when a campaign kind of goes live, would you say that like typically like the demand originates, is it from the immediate kind of like the creators, like from their network, or are you kind of helping drive demand? Or
We typically say that we see one third, one third, one third. So what that means is the creator comes in with audience that they have done almost a pre-campaign, building up momentum, building up anticipation. They come in and launch, and that first one third comes from the audience, the demand that they have driven. And those people then tell their friends. So there's sort of this viral effect where they post about it, they share it with their friends, and that's kind of the second one third. And then the last one third is platform and community, where there are people who just love to back early stage projects and ideas. And those are like the super backers, and they're high interest, they're high affinity, and they kind of catch on and catch the last. So it's obviously always different, but that's typically what we see. And it's really important that we pay attention to each of these dynamics, because there is, of course, if you go on to, I always say, if you go on an Amazon page and you don't see any stars or any reviews, where's the social proof? So the dynamics of what other people are doing does play a part. And that's where it all has to work together to catch those. And it's time limited. Crowdfunding campaign is 30 to 60 days typically. So you want to really make the most of your time live.
yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I'm also glad you mentioned as far as the campaign, right? Like a duration ultimately. So it sounds like actually each campaign kind of faces the chicken and the egg or kind of cold start problem in itself there.
They do. That's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. So people have gotten really strategic with that, and they've said, oh, I'm going to make sure my day one launch is a success so that I carry the momentum through.
Yeah. So if we kind of, think from like a high level though, like as a marketplace, how do you think about, kind of balancing supply and demand?
So for me, the way I always think internally, like in terms of resourcing, how much you put into both sides of our business, on the creators and the campaigns, the backers. It's I'm sure for everyone, it's a challenge, and you're always kind of like balancing that scale of if I put a little more in here, this falls a little behind. I put a little more here, and I want them both to be great. I think that's not a great answer. I think that we're constantly juggling that. I want to have the best experience for both. The ideal is when you can build product, features, experience that help, equally help both. And it's a win-win. That's the ideal. But sometimes it's like, well, should we improve the sign-up process? What is it like to sign up, which is really a supply value and doesn't do much for the demand side, but it's important and it's going to drive. And one drives, of course, as I think we probably all know, the demand only comes if they see supply they like, and the supply comes if they think that there's going to be backers or buyers, depending on what you're doing. So it's a constant juggling game, I think.
That's not only so nuanced, but always kind of changing as you mentioned. So one of the other things that I actually wanted to bring up as far as the crowdfunding space, right? And so operating in a kind of I would say like a regulated market, one that's also constantly changing. So are there any maybe I would say like specific challenges with that that you've recently kind of learned as you come into Indiegogo?
I think the biggest change, and I touched on it a little bit, is the ability for equity crowdfunding. And so when we started the company in 2008, we couldn't do equity crowdfunding. And, there was legislation around who could be an accredited investor. And so almost out of necessity, we kind of came up with this rewards based crowdfunding. That has since changed, and the Jobs Act was passed and things like that. And now you see equity crowdfunding companies. But we're so we found this really interesting sweet spot around perks-based. And there's a difference. I think there's not just a difference in the fact that the obvious, which is, do you own a bit of the company or not? But the difference is also who is on the demand side. So when you're talking equity crowdfunding, your demand side are investors. Now maybe those are everyday people. That's, I mean, part of the point, but they're looking at it as an investment. And when you're on the reward side of crowdfunding, your demand side is a little bit more your audience, your actual consumer, right? Or your end user. And they're not necessarily thinking, is this a good investment? They're thinking, is this something I want in my life? And I'm your fan. And of course, there's friends and family and other dynamics. But it's a really interesting thing where it's sort of two different audiences. And what we're finding is they can work hand in hand. And people often will do a successful rewards-based crowdfunding first and then go on to do an equity crowdfunding second. And the reward crowdfunding is their data point. That's their traction. And then they go and find investors. So that's a really interesting landscape. I think, there's probably other things going on too that it's too early to know. There's obviously a lot of stuff with blockchain and crypto and NFT, which we're not playing in right now, but kind of monitoring that and seeing what happens there. That is, in my view, like a form of crowdfunding as well, but in a very different way. So there's constant dynamics and going on that we're always looking at.
Yeah, that's really interesting as far as the point you mentioned, reward-based kind of crowdfunding being a little bit earlier. And sounds like a kind of a great way to kind of get some initial kind of feedback and signaling in order to then kind of go onto the equity kind of stage, as you mentioned. So we're going to get to questions here in a little bit. Otherwise, you and I could just go on chatting for a while here. Before we do though, so do you have maybe like a few tips that you'd like to share with early stage marketplace founders here?
Early stage, I think the biggest, I don't know if this is obvious for anyone, but my advice for early stage founders is find your niche, find your product market fit, and do whatever that is you do really well first, and then think about scale. So what does that mean is, we talked a little bit about verticals or categories. I saw so many different interesting kind of niche categories in the past. You look at like gym classes, movies, ski lifts. There's companies just on ski lift marketplace, these very, very interesting things. And I really believe that consumers, they have very, very unique, strong affinity and interest, and they will find their spot. I mean, look at this. This is, right here, a community of people with very specific interests who have found their way here. And it's the same thing when I talk about the coffee enthusiasts or the camping enthusiasts. Like glamping has skyrocketed for us. That's like a crazy, interesting category all of a sudden. So finding your spot and finding your early adopters, and figuring out what works is probably step one. And then step two is how can that scale, and how does it scale in a way that you have a good, sustainable, growing business that's not too niche that it can't grow to as big as whatever your ambitions are, your goals, and you don't alienate those early people who made you successful in the first place. So that's kind of the first spot to focus. And then I feel like from there, then you're just talking about logistics and operations and scaling a company, which is doable.
And that's going to be super helpful for founders here. So perfect segue right into the group Q&A. So hey, Dimitri, did you want to come on?
Hi, I'm an economist, and I'm curious if your platform has ever tried to make use of this something called a DAC, Dominance Assurance Contract, which is this idea that instead of if the project fails and not enough money is raised, everyone gets their money back. But you could also have a vision where, if someone put in $20, you could refund $25 if the project failed. That kind of creates this extra incentive for everyone.
I don't believe we've tried that in the past, but I will definitely look into it. Always open to those kinds of ideas. I think the concept of a project failing is something I'm super interested in, because as we know, and in actually, and sure, even in this community, you probably talk a lot about fail fast, and that's okay. And it's, if you're not failing like 100 times, you didn't try enough, right? In product, anyone who's got more of a product background, that's what you're taught. Like, try. It's okay. Do the earliest thing to fail. And of course, anything where you're an entrepreneur, a creator, any of these industries, that's a part of it. And so it's an interesting thing where we want to celebrate that in a way. We look and say, okay, in this same example I've been given, you have something, you think you've got something, you think you've got your big idea, and the audience just isn't there. Like, they just don't like it for whatever number of reasons. Better to have learned that before you went and produced it all, before you manufactured it all. Maybe you spent 20 grand, maybe you spent 6 months of your life instead of 500 grand and 2 years of your life, So it's better to have learned, even if it's a failure, than to have not learned and delayed that. But obviously, user experience and everything around that is a really interesting thing that I'm always I feel that's going to be the next big innovation here. Is like, it's a really, really great question, really astute actually, is how do we continue to celebrate that in other ways outside of, kind of the Silicon Valley product agile methodology, where that's become sort of understood, but what about other parts of our lives and the world, so that we can progress?
Awesome. Hey, Olivia, I saw you raise your hand. Do you want to come on?
Thanks, Mike. And thanks so much, Becky, for sharing your insights today with the group. I had a question around growth strategies. So wondering if you could share a little bit about, things that you've tried in the past that have been successful, or even on the flip side, things that you tried that maybe didn't work and why.
I think an interesting dynamic, and again, yeah, you may have faced this. What was working for a long time in paid marketing and in targeting, that landscape has changed pretty significantly over the years. I'll actually even go further back. I remember when, I'm going to date myself, but not by that much. I remember when the priority inbox became a thing, and the sponsored inbox, and suddenly email, which was a lot of companies' primary lever, dropped in efficiency overnight, probably by more than 50% is my guess. And that was a big struggle. How are we going to reach our audience and tell them about it? Email was our big thing, and SMS or push notifications, people don't love them. And so then, display marketing and advertising really took off. And now that's a little bit more challenged as well with data privacy changes. And I'm not opposed to data privacy changes, to be clear, but it changes your marketing tactics. So, if you're asking me, I think content it's trite. I think content is still the thing. That some of the easy ways are not there anymore, and how do you be really interesting and engaging and get attention? So content to me is really important. And then relationship building. So we really encourage, it's an interesting thing, like Indiegogo as a brand has a relationship with the audience, but each of the creators who run a campaign have their own relationship. And one of the cool things about crowdfunding is you do get to know who that is and what's their story and why are they doing it. And they can show you pictures, behind the scene pictures of the, if it's a film of the set, or if it's a facility in manufacturing, that's kind of cool. You never get to see that otherwise. So really this idea of being authentic and who you are and revealing more in the form of great content and authenticity and relationship building. I think in the end, that's the audience growth. That's a harder path than some of the, there's always some little optimizations you can do around the edges, but I think that's where we're going to see real growth.
It's a great question. No, thanks for sharing more on that, Becky. Hey, so Becky, I actually had a question from a founder that wanted to ask it and post it in the community advance, but it was around the importance of building trust, of course, for marketplaces. But how you think about building trust at Indiegogo.
That's a good question. So here's something really interesting. Again, I like to get into the heart and soul of some of these topics. The theory of Indiegogo is, like I said in the beginning, why should one, executive at one company decide? The people should decide. And so, so the theory is totally open. Like anyone can launch a campaign and anyone can back. But then we found, of course, over time that we do need, not that we never had any trust and safety team, but, there's this tug and pull behind that mentality and behind wanting to have some level of protection and oversight in your market, in your, company. And so, so we do have a trust and safety team. I think it's, the team is something I'm really proud of. They're just really excellent at, identifying fraud, identifying issues with credit, fraud on both sides, fraud on credit card sides, things like that. But the other thing that they do is they will also look at campaigns and say, okay, I think this is a real person. I don't think it's fraud. But, are you realistic? Can you really make it happen? Because we also have the kind of over your skis scenario where it's not intentionally fraud, but what's its likelihood of panning out? So we go through, we offer a program that we've made in the last few years called the Guidepost Program, where you can actually work with our team and they'll help and give some advice and kind of, tell people you might not be ready yet. I think you might need to go back to the drawing board, or you might be pricing too low. You might be a little overly optimistic about what this is going to take you to get it done. And you actually need more to really do it at the end of the day. Because we don't want to see, we can't, we don't gate it all, right? We're open for people to, we're a platform for people to use, but we don't want to see people be in a preventable spot, in a spot where they just didn't raise enough and shipping fees are more than they thought or whatever it might be. And then at the very end, they can't make it happen. So, so the team is there and I think they've done a ton. And then we did also create something called the Crowdfunding Trust Alliance. And we talk to other companies within crowdfunding and we kind of share things that we've seen, new forms of fraud. There's always, of course, new people doing new things, and we'll try to share trends we see, because we just believe, a safer industry for everyone is better. But it is a really interesting, it's a really interesting concept. How do you let people decide and then also be a gatekeeper? There's a tug and pull there.
Yeah, certainly. It's really cool to see or hear about the programs that you mentioned too, kind of staying ahead on that. So I know once we really get into the some of the topics like fraud, those are sometimes off the record conversations. So cool. Hey, Levi, do you want to come on? You sent me a message.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a little background. So for us, our startup is called Gigaton. We power storefronts. One of our ICPs are creators. So this aspect of curation is, one of the big things. And I think, I'd be curious as, how you guys look at curation. I see the, the top 10 finds or the stat picks. And so, would love to see anything that, you'd be willing to share when it comes to curation.
So I'd say sometimes it happens for us, which is interesting. I mentioned glamping was something that almost surprised us. It was a new category. We just had one hugely amazing, successful campaign. And then we talked a little bit about trust and safety. So interestingly, through those, you kind of learn and to start to build out protocol. So we learned, oh my gosh, how can we get comfortable with how can we get comfortable with a glamping campaign? okay, we want to understand they have some permits and like they actually own the land and, some things like that. And again, it's not necessarily us. It's us wanting the campaigner to show the backers these things so that they can get comfortable. But then once we had one hit or one sort of tent pole, the others tend to follow and they see success and they come along. So that's sometimes it's luck and then capitalizing on it. And then sometimes it's looking around and thinking about your kind of inventory and saying, we haven't had this type of thing in a while. We know our audience likes it. We're going to try to curate it. We are going to try to, so maybe like another example would be pet tech, like smart kitty litters and all these things are just like usually popular in crowdfunding. People like to get the latest in things for their pets. So that would be a category that we're always looking around and saying, how do we get the newest and best? And the team was at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And we get to see like all the cool new things and, see if any of them are good fits for crowdfunding. So yeah, there's kind of a curation team, but it's a little more unique than maybe if you were in e-commerce, like a buyer team, because again, the timing is so it's so specific, it's not just like products sitting around on a shelf. It's pre that. So there's a team that really works with people and tries to hit the right timing and the right inventory.
Hey, Becky, actually on the notice, well, once again, as far as like the inventory that kind of has like an expiring kind of timeline on it or date, are there any, I guess, like specific kind of like learnings around that you found that are interesting?
I would say sort of typical marketing stuff, which is that we see at the very beginning kind of a spike and then it drops and then it spikes again at the end when the timer's, counting down to the end. And so a lot of people will leverage, like they'll set an end date, well, extend it a little. And so there's some psychology there. We have a really cool thing now called drops, which is like a 24-hour, unique promotion. And maybe you'll add a different kind of perk for that time period or something like that. So we're incorporating more marketing in that to think about the time, but what we don't find works is just having it like open forever, because then it's not a crowdfunding, that's not a crowdfunding campaign at that point. And it's really important, like drawing that line, like we are not, if you go on Indiegogo, you'll see all over, it's not just a legal disclaimer. It's because it's true. Like crowdfunding is not shopping. You're not shopping. You're not buying a link to a film that you can see today. You're, backing the idea. And so like inherently that needs to be time limited, because that person then has to move on and like go execute. And so they can't be kind of in funding mode forever. And it doesn't resonate authentically with the audience either if they're doing that. So we're really thoughtful about those different phases and how that works.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting to learn more about. So, and speaking of time, we're almost out of time ourselves here for the chat, and definitely want to be conscious of that. But thanks again for taking the time to join us here today. This is super fun to kind of learn a little bit more about your experience and more dive into Indiegogo a little bit more. So, I actually had one last question before we wrap things up for you myself, and that's if you could go maybe right back to before you I would say joined even Groupon and entered the world of marketplaces. What would you tell yourself about them more specifically?
If I could go back, what would I tell myself? I would say what I did in general and in my career was just I chose interesting, hard problems, and I would still do that. And I would say don't get as frustrated, because the hard is when you learn, and that's the most fulfilling as well. So I think when I was younger, yeah, it was like hard problems were hard, and that would frustrate me, and I always wanted to get an A and I was a good student and things like that. And I'd say like in the workforce, struggling a little is how you grow and how you achieve something. And if it were easy, someone would have already done it, and all of those cliches, but it's true. And so, I think as long as you're always learning, you're always accomplishing. So it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're learning.
Yeah, and that's it's going to be great parting advice for us. And then last but not least, time for kind of a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn, Becky Center, Indiegogo. You can find me, BECKYCENTER.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll definitely include links in the recap post that we'll share after, and you'll have lots of founders and kind of teams here coming your way. So we once again really appreciate taking the time to join us here today. I know we bounced around a little bit, but it was definitely a fun chat. And thanks everyone for the great questions.